Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are going to step-by-step decode one of the most fascinating, stubborn puzzles in all of human history. We're looking at a people who quite literally built the foundation of the modern world, yet for decades their origins were a complete and total mystery. Archaeologists and historians kept hitting a brick wall trying to figure out where they came from. But recently, a groundbreaking ancient DNA revelation changed absolutely everything. So get ready, because we are going to reconstruct the step-by-step rise, the genius, and the stunning genetic reality of the Sumerians.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here is our chronological journey for today. First, a foundational mystery. Then, step-by-step to civilization, followed by the evolution of writing. Next, we'll hit the DNA revelation, trace the sequence of dissolution, and finally wrap up with an immortal legacy. Section 1. A foundational mystery. The missing origins of history's first builders.
So where did the Sumerians come from? Well, to even begin to answer that, we have to look at the sheer geographic improbability of where they built their world. Southern Mesopotamia, right down where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers spill into the Persian Gulf, is basically just a country of mud, clay, and reeds. I mean, there are no forests, there's almost no stone, there is absolutely no metal in the ground worth speaking of, and to make matters worse, those rivers don't behave. They flood completely without warning, they shift their courses, and they turn perfectly good land into uninhabitable swamp. By almost any metric, it was the worst possible place to build the very first great civilization. Which makes the central question of this explainer so frustrating: how did they end up there? A civilization this foundational should have left a massive, clear ancestral trail behind it, but they absolutely did not.
And listen, we really need to care about this, because look at what they left us. The 60-minute hour? That's them. The 24-hour day? Them. 360-degree circles in the 7-day week? All Sumerian. We are quite literally all still living inside the Sumerian operating system today. So the very first major clue to this missing origins mystery actually came from their words. You see, the Sumerian language is a massive anomaly. It's what linguists call an isolate, meaning it's related to absolutely nothing else on Earth. But notice how they borrowed incredibly foundational words. The names of their great cities like Nippur and Lagash, actually not Sumerian. The names of the rivers and lakes, borrowed. Even their core farming vocabulary, the words for plow, farmer, and sowing seed, were taken from an older language spoken by people who were already living in that muddy river valley before the Sumerians ever claimed it.
Section 2. Step-by-step to civilization. From unpredictable swamps to empires.
How did they actually conquer this chaotic, muddy environment and turn it into the world's first true cities? Step by step, they mastered the water. That was the mechanism. They faced a terrible geography of shifting rivers and unpredictable floods, but their solution was pure brilliance. Through meticulous engineering, the Sumerians built vast, highly organized networks of canals, dikes, and reservoirs to completely control the water flow. And this was the ultimate game changer for human society, because mastering water meant creating a massive, reliable surplus of food. And a surplus of food meant, for the very first time, not everyone had to spend all day farming. That one step created the space for the first artisans, the first merchants, and the first priests. And this brilliantly illustrates what happens when human minds are suddenly freed up from mere survival. The inventions just exploded in rapid succession. Step by step, they built the plow for efficient farming. They attached wheels onto donkey-drawn carts and eventually war chariots. They created architectural arches, columns, and those mind-bending, massive, stepped temples called ziggurats. They were actively solving quadratic equations and understood the right triangle over 1,000 years before Pythagoras was even a thought. They cataloged the stars, they predicted eclipses, and, in their downtime, they brewed beer so incredibly thick they literally had to drink it through straws. They even worshipped a goddess dedicated entirely to the brewing process.
Section 3. The evolution of writing. Making mud speak.
Now, of everything they engineered, this was the single most important invention they left us. And it didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was a slow, step-by-step process unfolding across thousands of years just to solve the mundane problem of tracking all that surplus food. Step 1, they started by using small clay tokens for trading, like 1 token equaled 1 sheep. Super simple. But then, step 2 happens around 3300 BCE. Officials in the city of Uruk had a stroke of genius. Instead of keeping loose tokens in a jar, why not just press the tokens into soft clay to record the transaction? That small shift literally lit the fuse of history. Step 3, people began scratching simple pictures into the clay, like a drawing of a loaf of bread or a person. And finally, the massive leap, step 4. They realized a symbol could represent a phonetic sound instead of just a physical object. By pressing a reed stylus into wet clay at an angle, they created the wedge-shaped marks we call cuneiform. Suddenly, they had captured the full, rich complexity of spoken language. Over 1 million. Because baked clay is practically immortal, that is the massive number of surviving cuneiform tablets we have today, which brings us to the ultimate forensic irony. We know these people in unbelievable detail. We can literally read their grocery lists, their trade disputes, and their love poems. They wrote down almost everything, except the one thing we really wanted to know: who they actually were. Section 4. The DNA revelation. The bones finally speak. To finally answer the origin question, we realized we couldn't just read the clay tablets. We had to read the genome. Now, ancient DNA in Mesopotamia is notoriously difficult to extract. The extreme heat and humidity usually break the genetic molecules down until there is absolutely nothing left. So for decades, the tablets talked endlessly, but the bones stayed completely silent. And remember that stubbornly strange fact about their language? Because it was an isolate, meaning it had no parent, no cousins, and zero connection to any other tongue, it fueled over a century of completely incorrect theories. Now, what's really interesting about this is the ultimate plot twist, because recent breakthroughs finally pulled a clear genetic signal right out of the noise, and it completely shattered the old theory. People used to assume the Sumerians were this distinct, migrating tribe that swept in from some mysterious single location, like the Indus Valley or the Caucasus. But no, the new DNA evidence revealed they weren't mysterious invaders arriving on an empty shore at all. They were a fusion. The Sumerians were a blend of the local Mesopotamian farmers, the older Ubaid and Uruk cultures, mixed together with neighbors migrating in from the Zagros highlands, populations from the north, and people from the Levant. The answer was never a place, it was a process. I absolutely love that quote because it is the core takeaway here. This slow, step-by-step genetic fusion perfectly answers why they borrowed pre-existing farming words and settled on top of older sites. They were the result of many different streams of people merging together in one river valley to create something entirely new. Section 5. The sequence of dissolution. The slow fade of an empire. Now, this raises a really fascinating logical question. If the Sumerians didn't just arrive from nowhere, how did this incredible multicultural fusion actually disappear? Let's walk chronologically through the step-by-step process of their dissolution. The fade-out actually started with a neighbor. In the 24th century BCE, Sargon of Akkad, who legend says was an abandoned baby raised by a gardener, rose up, conquered the squabbling city-states, and built the world's first true empire. During this time, Sumerian and Akkadian cultures really began bleeding into one another. Then, around 2200 BCE, total disaster. The Gutians, tribal warriors from the Zagros Mountains, invaded. They had no idea how to manage the delicate irrigation canals, and agriculture completely collapsed into a dark age. Later on, a king named Urnumu managed to drive them out, briefly reviving the culture and rebuilding the great ziggurats. But the end was already in motion. It all culminated in 2004 BCE when the Elamites violently sacked the great city of Ur. Actually, there is a profound tragedy hidden in that brief revival by Ur-Nammu. The rulers deliberately restored Sumerian as the official language of the government. But here is the catch. The actual people out in the streets were already speaking Akkadian. You don't have to restore a living thing, right? So this proves that Sumerian was already becoming a relic. The people were slowly but surely dissolving right back into the neighboring populations that the DNA shows they were already partly made of. The gods abandon the city and leave it to ruin. By 2004 BCE, centuries of over-irrigation had literally poisoned the soil with salt. Crops were failing, and invasions from Amorites and Elamites were pouring in. They recorded these bleak, heartbreaking final days in a poem we call The Lament of Ur. The physical empire was totally broken. Section 6. An immortal legacy. The thread never broke. So the crucial point is that the violent fall of Ur was not an extinction. It was just a final merging. The literal DNA and the cultural bedrock of the Sumerians survived. Their language lived on as a sacred scholarly tongue for nearly 2,000 more years, very much like Latin did in medieval Europe. Their religion, their epic literature, their laws, and their advanced mathematics were absorbed whole by their conquerors, the Akkadians, the Babylonians, and the Assyrians. And their physical DNA didn't disappear either. That original genetic fusion was just carried forward, stitched right into the ancestry of the entire region.
The empire ended. The inheritance did not. The Sumerians vanished as a distinct people, for sure, but the step-by-step process they started didn't die. It dissolved into its neighbors and traveled down through history, embedding itself into the very foundations of our world right now. It is literally still taking away in the 60 seconds of the minute you are living in right at this exact moment. Which leaves us with a pretty thrilling question. If ancient DNA can completely rewrite the origins of history's first builders, what other lost civilizations are just waiting in the ground to tell us who we really are?